Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in life when silence screams louder than shouts, and in that silence we grow. Stay with me, because by the end of this message, you will have the smartest, most powerful way to deal with the very people who drain your energy. Shake your peace and walk away as if you were the storm. Let me begin with this truth. Notavarian, who comes close is meant to stay. And not everyone who smiles is your friend. There is something deeply tragic about the way we cling to people who hurt us, and how often we do so with the hope that if we just love them enough, they will change. But the truth, the quiet truth, that sits in the back of your soul like a shadow you try to ignore is this: it was never about how much love you gave, it was about how much they refused to receive. So many people walk through life blindfolded, not because they cannot see, but because they refuse to look, and what they miss every single time is the most important truth. When it comes to dealing with toxic people, you must learn to recognize the pattern, not the person. It's human nature to want to see the best in others. We hold on to fragments of kindness, scattered words that once felt sincere, the echo of a memory that told us maybe they didn't mean it. Maybe we're just having a bad day, but what if the day wasn't bad? What if this is who they choose to be? Repeatedly, patterns don't lie, words do, and emotions, though deeply real, are not always reliable guides when tangled in the web of manipulation. A toxic person may not always wear cruelty on their sleeve. Sometimes it comes dressed in charm, sometimes in apologies, sometimes in the promise that this time things will be different. But here's the secret that changes everything. Don't watch the face, watch the cycle. Ask yourself, do they consistently blame others? Do they avoid accountability like a thief dodging the light? Do they weaponize silence or twist your words into weapons they can use against you? That is not an accident. Fate is not just their personality, that is a pattern, and once you see it, once you truly see it, there is no going back. You cannot unsee the truth. The moment you stop analyzing the who and start observing the what, you begin to free yourself, because it no longer matters if this toxic person is your sibling, your parent, your partner, or your friend from childhood. Love does not excuse harm, and familiarity does not make destruction acceptable. Toxicity is not defined by volume. It doesn't always scream in your face. Sometimes it whispers in manipulation, sometimes it sighs in sarcasm, sometimes it smiles while planting seeds of doubt inside your mind until you question your worth, your memory, your voice. Recognizing the pattern means you begin to study behavior with clarity, not judgment, because clarity is not cruel, it is compassionate. First to yourself. It says, I will not ignore what is happening over and over again just because I wish it weren't so. And here's the irony: most toxic people will never change. Not because they can't, but because they don't have to. Why should they when they're the power of recognizing patterns? Behavior goes unchallenged when their apologies are accepted without changing. When their damage is dismissed as just who they are, you must decide if you are going to continue playing a role in a cycle that benefits no one, least of all yourself. When we focus solely on that person, we fall into the trap of romanticizing potential. We believe if we just try harder, love deeper, forgive more quickly, then perhaps they'll become the person we once glimpsed in rare shenanigans. But you are not here to rescue people from themselves at the cost of your peace. You are not here to lose sleep over someone who sleeps peacefully after causing you pain. Patterns, my friends, are revelations, and they are your greatest teacher. Every time someone disrespects you and you forgive without change, you teach them that your forgiveness is free, even when your soul is paying the cost. But when you begin to recognize the pattern, you start to disrupt it, and disruption is power. This power doesn't always come in grand dramatic exits. Sometimes it's in the subtle shift of how you respond. You stop defending yourself, you stop over-explaining, you stop hoping they'll wake up and suddenly see your worth. Instead, you begin to act on your worth regardless of whether they see it or not. When you recognize the pattern, you reclaim your time. You reclaim your energy. You no longer participate in emotional games designed to keep you confused. You begin to understand that pattern has never been about love, it's been about control. And when you stop reacting to the bait, the game ends. There is a quiet strength in becoming an observer and stepping back, emotionally detached, and simply watching what happens without your effort to fix, to savvy, or to earn. And what you'll see is this: toxic people thrive in reaction, they thrive in your confusion. But when you become still, when your peace becomes non-negotiable, you begin to see just how loud their silence becomes, how fragile their power is without your energy feeding it. And here is what most people fear to admit: you don't have to hate someone. To walk away, you don't even have to explain. You simply have to honor what the pattern has shown you. If someone's repeated behavior brings chaos, pain, or doubt into your life, then they are not safe. And love without safety is not love at all. It's endurance, and you were not born to endure someone's damage disguised as connection. There's a world of difference between compassion and self-betrayal. Learn it, honor it. Toxic people often use guilt to make you feel responsible for the way they treat you, but let me say this clearly: you are not responsible for someone else's emotional immaturity. You are responsible for what you tolerate, and the day you stop tolerating patterns that harm you is the day you start loving yourself more than the illusion of who they could be, because life is too brief to live in emotional prisons built by other people's unresolved wounds. It's too sacred to spend explaining basic decency. You're not asking for too much when you ask for respect, honesty, or kindness, or just asking the wrong person. So take the blindfold off, look at the pattern, let it teach you what the person is trying to hide. Then decide what kind of life you are willing to live and what kind of treatment you are no longer willing to excuse. The smartest way to deal with toxic people begins the moment you stop believing in their words and start believing in their behavior. There is a language far more profound than words, and it speaks in silence, not the silence of weakness, not the silence of surrender, but the silence of restraint, excellence that says, I see what you're doing, but I refuse to dance with your dysfunction. When you've spent your life around people who thrive on noise, drama, and emotional reactions, you begin to realize that silence is not just an absence of sound, it is the presence of strength, because silence, when used with why silence speaks louder, then defense intention becomes your greatest weapon against those who seek to steal your peace by provoking your voice. Toxic people feed off energy. They are not nourished by calm or understanding. They are fed by reaction, the raised voice, the defensive words, the impulse to explain yourself over and over again. All of it becomes fuel to their fire. And when you stop giving it, when you go quiet, they lose their grip. But let's be clear, choosing silence doesn't mean you're rallying mistreatment. It means you've reached a level of emotional maturity where your response is no longer about them. It's about you. It's about valuing your inner balance more than their chaos, because not everything deserves a reply. Not every accusation requires a defense, and not every attack needs to be met with a counterstrike. Sometimes the wisest thing you can do is say nothing and walk away with your dignity intact. Silence terrifies those who seek control through conflict, because when you don't respond, they're forced to face themselves. They're left alone with their behavior, with no one to blame, no one to guilt, no one to twist, and in that space their power begins to crumble. You see, when you argue with someone who has no interest in understanding you, you're not exchanging ideas, you're entering a battlefield where logic dies and ego reigns and no one wins. You walk away wounded, drained, questioning yourself and wondering how the conversation spiraled so quickly. That's because it wasn't a conversation, it was a trap, and silence, that true, grounded, purposeful silence, is how you disarm it. But silence isn't easy, it's not passive, it requires discipline. It takes an immense amount of self-control to sit with your emotions and not let them bleed out into the hands of someone who will only use them against you. It takes strength to hurley's told about you to be misunderstood, misjudged, or even attacked, and still not respond with the venom they're hoping for. This is the silence that protects your spirit, the silence that says, oh, I'm not here to prove anything to you. Because when your inner world is stable, the outer world loses its power to shake you. You stop trying to convince people are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop chasing after closure from those who benefit from keeping you confused. You start choosing your peace over your pride, and that changes everything. There's something deeply unnerving to toxic people about someone who doesn't react. It frustrates them. It exposes them, because their entire strategy depends on getting inside your head. They want to live their rent-free, and your voice is their invitation. Every time you defend yourself to someone who twists your truth, you open the door wider. Every time you argue with someone who rewrites the narrative, you step into their illusion. But when you go silent, to take back the keys, you lock the door. You say, this space, my mind, is not yours to manipulate. Silence is not silence when it's intentional. It becomes a mirror. It reflects their behavior back at them. It forces them to sit with themselves without the distraction of your energy, and that reflection, it's often the one thing they fear most because it reveals truth, it reveals the games, the patterns, the toxicity, and it does so without you saying a single word. Let them talk, let them rant, let them build entire conversations in their head with things you never said. You don't owe a response to every narrative they create. Your silence speaks of a higher truth, the truth that peace cannot be bought through performance, that dignity doesn't require a debate, that self-worth is not determined by whether they understand you. There's a kind of silence that comes from pain, the silence of someone who's been ignored, silenced, dismissed, but this is not that silence. This is the silence of someone who has learned, someone who has risen, someone who no longer gives their energy away. Boundaries aren't walls, they're self-respect just because someone demands it. And when you embrace this silence, something powerful happens. You begin to hear yourself more clearly. You start to feel your own presence. You realize that not every situation needs your involvement, that some things resolve themselves, and you remove your reaction, that peace is not passive, it's active. It's a decision made moment by moment to rise above rather than sink to their level. Imagine how much strength it takes to remain still in the face of provocation, to hear insults and know they are not yours to carry, to be baited into an argument and simply not show up. That is strength, that is mastery, that is emotional sovereignty. Let them think they've won because you didn't respond. Let them believe your silence means defeat. That illusion is not yours to correct, because the moment you decide that your energy is sacred, you stop arguing with anyone who tries to pull you into chaos. You become uncheckable, unreachable, and untouchable by the very forces that once consumed you. They will call your silence cold. They will call it avoidance. They will label you as distant, difficult, or even cruel. Let them. They cannot understand the power of silence until they've tasted the cost of chaos. Let your life, your peace, and your choices speak for you. Let your silence become your sanctuary. And when they knock, hoping for the old version of youth, one who would cry, beg, explain, or react, let your silence answer the door. Let it say without words, that person no longer lives here, because silence, when chosen with intention, is not retreat, it is rise. It is the declaration of a soul that no longer dances to the noise of others, but moves to the rhythm of its own peace. There comes a moment in every soul's journey when it must decide whether to continue shrinking to fit inside someone else's comfort, or to resettle the full height of its own dignity, and that moment is marked by one word: boundaries. People misunderstand boundaries. They think of them as walls, as harsh refusals, as cold and heartless barriers, but they are not walls, they are doors. Doors that say, you may come this far and no farther. Doors that protect your peace, your mind, your body, your time. Not from strangers, no, often from the very people who claim to love you most, but act in ways that say otherwise. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. They are what happen when you have suffered just enough to realize that your kindness without limits becomes a pathway for your own destruction. When you keep giving and giving until there's nothing left for yourself, something inside begins to crumble. Your smile becomes a performance, your silence becomes exhaustion, and your heart, once wide open, begins to collapse under the weight of someone else's entitlement. You were not born to be endlessly available. Those who drain you, you were not placed on this earth to play the emotional caretaker for those who refuse to grow. You are not a vessel for someone else's unchecked anger, manipulation, or selfishness. You are not here to be the emotional punching bag for those who cannot carry their own weight. Every time you say yes to something that violates your values, your peace, or your well-being, you are quietly saying no to yourself, and you do that enough times, you begin to disappear. Your voice dims, your needs vanish beneath the weight of other people's expectations, until one day you look in the mirror and no longer recognize the reflection staring back. Boundaries are the act of reclaiming that reflection. They say, I matter too, my time is valuable, my energy is sacred, my soul is not for rent. And they don't require anger to be effective, they require self-respect. When you respect yourself deeply, you stop over-explaining, you stop negotiating with people who benefit from your silence. You stop attending arguments you didn't ask for, because you've learned that not every situation needs your sacrifice, not every relationship does your presence, and not every call must be answered. People who truly love you will not be offended by your boundaries. They will respect them. Buttholes who have grown used to walking through your life like they own it, they will protest, they will say, You've changed. They will say you're selfish. They will call you cold. Let them misunderstand your strength. Let them mislabel your growth. Because the moment you set a boundary, you are no longer playing the role they cast you in, and people don't like losing characters in the drama they've built around themselves. But you don't belong in a script where your only lines are yes, Andy, I'm sorry. You don't belong in a story where your value is measured by how much pain you can endure. You are not noble for suffering quietly. You are not holy for staying small to make others feel comfortable. You are worthy with or without their approval, and boundaries are the language that worth speaks. There's a kind of liberation that your peace matters. More than their drama happens when you no longer betray yourself to keep the peace. When you say no without guilt, when you cancel plans because you need rest, when you decline a conversation that feels more like a trap than a connection, when you walk away not because you hate someone, but because you love yourself enough to stop bleeding for someone who keeps handing you the knife. It's not about shutting people out, it's about letting the right people in, people who don't need to be convinced to treat you well, people who don't punish you for having needs, people who don't see your boundaries as rejection but as direction, a map of how to love you properly. You cannot change people, you cannot make someone respect what they don't value, but you can teach them who you are, not by pleading, but by setting standard. If someone continues to violate your boundaries after you've expressed them with clarity, they're not confused, they're comfortable. Comfortable crossing lines because they know you'll keep redrawing them, but once you stop redrawing, once you say, this is it, the game changes, and if they leave, let them. A boundary that cost you someone who never respected you to begin with is not a loss, it's a rescue. The hardest part off boundaries is not setting them, it's keeping them, especially when you've been conditioned to please, especially when you fear abandonment, especially when you were raised to believe that your worth is found in what you give others, not what you give yourself. But that conditioning can be undone, that fear can be faced, that old story can be rewritten. You are not responsible for how someone reacts to your growth. You are only responsible for whether or not you honor it, and boundaries are how you honor the sacred within you. They are how you protect the parts of yourself that took years to build. They are how you tell the world, this version of me, the healed, growing wiser me, is not up for negotiation. Let them be uncomfortable, let them wrestle with. The absence of your compliance growth is not always received with applause, sometimes it's met with resistance. But the discomfort of setting boundaries is far less painful than the regret of living without them, so let this be your reminder. You don't need permission to protect your peace. You don't need Arison to take up space. You don't need a debate to validate your decisions. If it costs your joy, your clarity, your sanity, it's too expensive. Say no, say not today, say I won't do this anymore, and say it with the quiet confidence of someone who has learned to love themselves too much to stay in places that ask them to shrink. There is something sacred about silence, not just the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. That depunchable calm that wraps itself around you like a soft cloak after the storm. And yet so many trade that peace knowingly or not for chaos. Disguised as connection, there are people who enter your life not to walk beside you but topple you off course. They don't bring calm, they bring noise, and you feel it even. If you don't say it aloud, you feel it in your racing thoughts, in the way your chest tightens when they speak, in the way you rehearse every word before you talk, hoping it won't lead to another argument. Another guilt trip, another emotional ambush. That is not love, that is emotional turbulence, and your peace is worth far more than the temporary illusion of belonging to someone who doesn't understand how to cherish. You peace is not loud, it doesn't demand attention, it doesn't throw tantrums. Peace is quiet, deliberate, gentle, and it's in that gentleness where your strength resides. Yet we are taught often too early that being needed is more important than being nourished. That helping someone stay afloat is a noble sacrifice, even if they're the ones who keep pucking holes in the boat. There are people who will use your empathy as a leash, who will bring you into their chaos and convince you it's your responsibility to clean it up. They wear their wounds like armor, and they hand you the sword, asking you to fight battles they never intended to end. But if someone is not willing to change, to heal, to reflect, then your presence only becomes a convenience for their stagnation. You are not responsible for someone else's healing. You are responsible for the preservation of your peace, because if you are constantly being dragged into storms that are not yours, you'll wake up one day and realize you've Forgotten what the sun feels like, you'll forget what it means to laugh without tension, to speak without walking on eggshells, to simply exist without needing to fix, to explain, to prove. Cowards doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it comes dressed in drama. Sometimes it's the endless cycle of conflict resolution and relapse. Sometimes it's the calm after the apology, just long enough for you to lower your guard before it begins again and again and again, and each time you tell yourself this time it will be different, knowing in the quiet places of your mind that it won't be. Because detachment isn't cruelty, it's clarity. Nothing changes when peace is always the sacrifice. There is a deep, almost invisible cost to tolerating emotional case. It's paid in fragments of your joy, in delayed dreams and sleep that never quite rests you, in smiles that don't reach your eyes, in relationships where love feels like labor and calm feels like walking through a minefield, and the longer you stay, the more you lose, not just in time but in identity. You start to believe that maybe peace is too much to ask, that maybe you're expecting perfection, but peace isn't perfection. It's the absence of warfare in your own home. It's conversations that don't leave bruises. It's being around someone and not feeling like you have to brace yourself every time they enter the room. It's not needing recovery time after every encounter. You don't have to justify protecting your peace. You don't need permission to detach from someone who thrives on keeping you off balance, and it's not your job to help them regulate what they refuse to acknowledge. Some people will never find peace because they aren't looking for it. They're looking for control, and the more peace you have, the more their chaos resents you. There's a strange reaction that happens when you begin choosing peace over drama. People who benefit from your distress will label you as selfish. They'll say you've changed, that you've built walls. No, you've built gates thoughtfully, carefully, and you've adjusted. Not everyone deserves a key. That is not cruelty, that is maturity. If Somione cannot find stability within themselves, they will try to pull it from you. They will drain your patience, test your boundaries, and call it passion or intensity. But if every interaction with them leaves you exhausted, anxious, or questioning your worth, then what you have is not connection, it's erosion. Peace doesn't mean there are no hard days or difficult conversations, but it means those moments don't define their relationship. It means you feel safe in the storm because both people are rowing in the same direction. When only one person is rowing, the boat just spins, and that's spinning, that endless loop, offering to move forward with someone who's anchored in dysfunction, that is chaos, that robs you of your stillness. You deserve to be around people who calm your nervous system, not trigger it, who speak to you with kindness even in disagreement, who don't make you choose between loving them and loving yourself. And that is where the cost becomes too high, when your self-respect has to be negotiated just to keep someone in your life. Some will tell you that peace is lonely, that silence is abandonment, but solitude is no emptiness. It is space to heal, to breathe, to hear your own thoughts again without them being drowned out by someone else's crisis. And in that space you find clarity that Shao's never allows, clarity that says, you've paid enough, you've tried enough. You've lost enough of yourself trying to keep someone else from falling apart. Let them fall, let them sit with the consequences of their choices. Let them feel the silence that comes when you stop responding. You are not abandoning them, you are choosing yourself and your peace or healing your future. They're worth more than anyone's drama, tantrum, or manipulation. Let them call it selfish, let them call it cold, but when you sleep without anxiety, when you wake without dread, when you smile, and it no longer feels forced, you'll know it wasn't selfish. It was necessary, it was survival, it was the quiet, courageous act of finally choosing peace and meaning it. There comes a time when you stop fighting to be understood, not because you've given up, but because you've woken up. You stop trying to explain your boundaries, you stop trying to make them see your side. You stop bending your truth to fit someone else's comfort. Fatment is not bitterness, it's not vengeance, it is detachment, and it is onuf. The most powerful acts of clarity a person can embrace. People confuse detachment with coldness, they mistake stillness for indifference. They see your silence and think it's made of stone, but true detachment doesn't come from the absence of love. It comes from the presence of wisdom. It's born the moment you realize that your emotional investment in someone who refuses to grow has become a slow erosion of your own spirit. You can love someone deeply and still walk away. You can care profoundly and still remain silent. Becco's love without self-respect is a kind of captivity, and detachment is the key that unlocks That invisible cage, the cage built from hope, from nostalgia, from memories you keep replaying in your mind, hoping one day the ending will change. It won't, and that realization doesn't shatter you, it frees you. Detachment is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is the ability to see a situation for what it is, not what you wish it could be. It's looking at someone and seeing not just their potential, but their pattern, not just their charm, but their choices. And when those choices consistently bring you pain, when their pattern is a cycle of confusion and chaos, you begin to understand that staying is not compassion, it's self-abandonment. The most heal without becoming cold, painful truth is this: some people will never be what you need, not because they're incapable, but because they have no intention of becoming it. They've grown comfortable in your forgiveness. They've mistaken your patience for permission. They believe you'll always be there no matter how many times they step over the line, because you always have been until you're not. Detachment is themament. Your soul whispers enough, not in anger, not in fear, but in peace. It is that quiet decision to reclaim your energy from someone who has taken it for granted. You stop showing up for conversations that never change. You stop begging for reciprocity that never arrives. You stop offering your vulnerability as a sacrifice on an altar that never held anything sacred. And something beautiful begins to happen when you detach. Your clarity returns. You begin to see how much you've tolerated under the guise of love. You see that times you were gaslit into thinking you were the problem. You see how often you were the one trying, fixing, giving, while they watched, complained, or disappeared. That kind of imbalance doesn't just drain your energy, it distorts your reality. It teaches you that relationships are meant to be enjoyed, that love should cost you your peace, that caring for someone means carrying the full weight of the connection. While they skate by on excuses, but detachment slices through that illusion like a blade. It shows you what's real. It shows you where your love ends and where their neglect begins. You can be kind and still walk away. You can be empathetic and still close the door. You don't need to hate someone to release them. In fact, detachment works best when there's no resentment left. Just a quiet knowing that you've done enough of it, enough, tried enough, and now your healing requires distance. This isn't about building walls, it's about building foundations, ones that don't shake every time someone else has a bad day, ones that don't crumble because someone refuses to take responsibility. Detachment is not the end of care. It's the beginning of balance. You stop trying to control how they treat you. You start controlling how long you allow it to continue. There is a strength in walking away without drama, without shouting, without needing to be right. The real closure is not in what they say, it's in what you no longer need them to say. It's when your peace becomes more important than their presence. It's when their chaos no longer moves you because you've built your life on higher ground. They will accuse you of being cold. They will say you've changed, and they're right, Yahav. You've stopped entertaining behavior that once held you hostage. You've stopped measuring your worth by how much pain you can endure. You've stopped calling dysfunction love just because it came wrapped in apologies and promises. Detachment is the decision to no longer be manipulated by hope. You stop waiting for them to wake up. You stop waiting for the version of them that only existed in your imagination. You accept that they are who they are, not because they can't be better, but because they choose not to be. And when you accept that, a calm settles over you. You're no longer triggered by their patterns. You're no longer tied to the outcome. You simply observe and you let go. This kind of detachment doesn't make you less loving, it makes you wiser with your love. You give it where it's safe, where it's mutual, where it's met with respect, not expectation. And when it isn't, you step back, not as punishment, but as protection. Because love should not feel like war, and peace should not feel like a crime. You deserve to wake up and not dread your conversations, to sit in silence without walking on eggshells, to share your thoughts without being dismissed or dissected. That is the life. Detachment leads you toward no desolation but liberation, and those who are meant to stay will meet you there. They will honor your peace, not disturb it. They will see your silence and feel its strength, not its threat. They will understand that your detachment was not a rejection of them, it was a rescue of yourself. There's a quiet kind of damage that doesn't show on the skin. It doesn't lead, it doesn't bruise, it doesn't scream in the night, it simply sits there beneath the surface, changing the way you see the world. It happens when you've been hurt one too many times and something inside you decides that softness is no longer safe, that to protect your heart you must bury it, that to survive the world you must become harder. than the pain it gave you. It's a common response, understandable, even expected, after betrayal, after manipulation, after abandonment. The soul builds armor thick, cold, impenetrable, not because it wants to shut the world out, but because it believes the world cannot be trusted anymore, and the tragedy is not that this happens. The how to reclaim your energy from toxic people tragedy is that so many people stay in that hardened state and begin to believe it's who they really are. But you are not the bitterness that found you. You are not the walls you built. You are not danger you used to keep people away. Those are just survival tools forged in the heat of hurt. And while they may have protected you for a time, they are not your home. You are not meant to live in armor. Healing is not about forgetting what happened. It's not about pretending the pain didn't shape you. It's about making a choice not to let that pain come. The lens through which you see everything when you harden, you close yourself off, not just to the hurt, but to the joy. You numb the pain, yes, but you also numb the body. The quiet mornings, the warm laughter, the honest connection. You become a locked room, guarded and silent, and you call it strength, but strength is not in the locking, it's in the unlocking, the reopening, the returning to softness with wisdom in your eyes. People will tell you to be tougher, to get over it, to not let anyone see you cry. They will celebrate your detachment, not knowing it came from a wound, not a choice. But healing doesn't happen in the pretending. It happens when you face the wound head on. Sit with it, breathe through it, and let it move through you rather than define you. There's a grace in allowing yourself to feel again fully, deeply, honestly, not for the sake of returning to who you were before the pain, but to become someone new because of it. Someone wiser, more discerning, but still open, still capable of kindness, still willing to believe in the good. Hurt people who never he'll hurt others. That's not a glitch, it's a reality you see every day. People bleeding on those who didn't cut them, people lashing out, not because you've wronged them, but because someone else did, and they never learn to let it go. That chain of pain continues passive from soul to soul like a curse, unless someone chooses to break it, unless someone chooses to heal, even when it would be easier to stay cold. That someone can be you. You don't owe your pain to anyone, but you owe your healing to yourself, because you cannot live a life of peace while dragging chains off the past behind you. You cannot build healthy connections with a heart still guarded by ghosts, and you cannot love fully if you're still waiting to be abandoned. So breathe, lay the armor down. All that rage, that numbness, that distrust, it may have protected you once, but it's time to let it go. Let it fall piece by piece. You don't need it anymore. You're not the same person you were when the wound was fresh. You've learned, you've seen what darkness looks like, and still you're here reaching for light. That is not weakness, that is resilience. Some people confuse healing with forgetting, but real healing remembers and chooses peace anyway. It remembers the betrayal and chooses not to become bitter. It remembers the manipulation and chooses not to manipulate and return. It remembers the silence, the abandonment, the cruelty, and still chooses compassion, not because the pain was small, but because the heart is big. It's easier to shut down than to open back up, easier to stay numb than to risk being hurt again. But nothing truly meaningful comes from ease. Connection, love, trust, they all require vulnerability, and vulnerability by its nature means taking the risk that you might be hurt again. Healing doesn't mean you won't be, it means you'll know final reflections that will shift your life, how to survive it and how not to let it turn you into someone you're not. You are not your pain, you are what you choose to become. In response to it, let that be something beautiful, something soft, but unbreakable. Let your healing be loud, not in words, but in how you live, in how you set boundaries without venom, in how you say no with clarity, not with cruelty, in how you let people go without rage, just create resolve, in how you love again, carefully, slowly, but without punishment for what others did to you. Don't let what broke you become what builds you. Let your healing build you. Let it shape a heart that doesn't close but shines with discernment, one that doesn't forget the past but no longer lives in it, one that doesn't need revenge. Because peace has become the only answer worth giving. Every scar tells a story, but it doesn't have to tell a story of defeat. It can tell a story of survival, of rebirth, of strength. It does not roar but whispers, I made it through and I'm still kind. That is the power of healing. That is where the greatest transformation begins. Not in hiding, not in the hardening, but in the decision to walk through the pain and come out softer. Not in fragility, beauty, and grace. Ladies and gentlemen, life is far too short to argue with small minds, to wrestle with energy-draining spirits, to justify your light to those who only see shadows. So here's what you do: don't chase, don't explain, don't fight, just rise, rise so far above the noise that their words can't. Even reach your peace, walk away, and let the silence speak volumes, because peace is not a place you go, it's a decision you make. And the smartest way to deal with toxic people is to simply not let them live rent-free in the palace of your mind. When you stop responding to chaos, you starve it, let them wander, let them spin, but you keep walking in peace. Thank you.